Hello, my name is David Patterson, and this is my final project for Western Civ 1. And the source that I chose to do is that my primary source is the Pyramid of Giza, which was built by Pharaoh Khufu around 2560 BC by a workforce of approximately 25,000 total citizens who were paid and well fed and were not slaves. The pyramid is made up of 2,000 total limestone blocks that are about 2.5 tons each. The construction took about 20 years. Thanks to hieroglyphics and Egypt's uniquely early developed writing system, we can tell much about the Egyptians' way of life, culture, and abilities. I've chosen three secondary sources. One would be Explaining the Shafts in Khufu's Pyramid at Giza, which is a research article by Anthony P. Sakovich. The second is How the Great Pyramid Was Built by Craig B. Smith. It's a Smithsonian book. And the third was Feeding the Pyramid Builders Early Agriculture at Giza in Egypt, which is by a whole plethora of authors. The three historical questions that I chose to ask was one, how did the Egyptians manage to make such magnificent structures so long ago? And really, I'm focusing on how they managed to make the Pyramid of Giza specifically. How did the Egyptians afford to feed such a large workforce over a long period of time? And three is, why were there so many seemingly unexplainable aspects to the way the Pyramid of Giza was constructed? And what do those odd constructions have to say about Khufu? So, with the first question, how did the Egyptians manage to make the Pyramid of Giza? To fully answer this question, I think we have to discuss the motivation of the Egyptian people. To create such a structure as Giza or any other pyramids, there has to be a serious commitment, inspiration, and motivation. Craig B. Smith, in his book How the Great Pyramid Was Built, believes that the Pharaoh's pyramid was an act of national pride. He compared it to the Apollo space program undertaken by the direction of President Kennedy. The forces that boosted their motivation lie in their culture and religion. The pharaohs ruled by divine right and were favored and protected by the gods, according to ancient texts, and over time, the lines between pharaoh and God started to blur. As the theological and religious lines blended with the pharaoh, resurrection in the afterlife became the goal for many, such as Khufu, and so that was yet another motivating factor to build Giza. And you have to keep in mind that for the Egyptian people, the line between God and Pharaoh over time in the Old Kingdom began to become closer and closer to the point where they believed their pharaohs were basically gods on earth. And so it became very important to, for one, obey them, and second, to glorify them. So as for the construction itself, the site for Giza was selected because of its prominence. It occupies a plateau overlooking the Nile River. The area is also abundant in raw material, and it supports ideal support for a massive structure, which was of supreme importance as the Egyptians had learned from constructions of earlier pyramids, such as Dashur and Saqqara. There was sufficient limestone nearby, a limestone field of approximately 700 cubits by 800 cubits and up to 80 cubits thick. A canal leading to the river from the main quarry was excavated, and a shallow water port was constructed at the edge of the plateau for transporting stones from Tura and Aswan. Large barges would transport granite beams from 900 miles upriver, from Aswan down to Giza. There were granaries, bakeries, and breweries, and livestock was brought down from the north to feed the workforce. Although the desert winds were not ideal, the Egyptians were extremely motivated to build the pyramid, regardless of the conditions. The extensive records of structure, tombs, and monuments left by the Egyptians is evidence of their advanced engineering and construction abilities. Based on his experience as a program manager, Smith proposes the likely administrative structure of the workforce, with the pharaoh in charge, a grand vizier Himiuna under him, then three overseers, one for constructions, one for quarries, and one for operations. Operations would then be broken down into site operations, commissary, and stores and materials. Construction overthought was thought to be broken down into finishes, construction of infrastructure, and ramps. Then, within each of those sectors, there would be specific teams for each step of the project. Smith points out that it would be absolutely necessary to have extensive organization to undertake such a large project effectively. Himeuno had teams completing analysis to come up with a realistic timeline and schedule that had to be coordinated with the flooding of the Nile, while also be congruent with religious timing and done before the pharaoh dies. The ramp construction and planning was of special importance because the larger the ramp, the more raw materials it would take to build it. So to make it efficient, there were many small ramps. According to Smith, the recruitment plan took into account that once the crops were harvested, a large number of agricultural workers could be brought to the site on a temporary seasonal basis. Thousands of unskilled laborers were ultimately required to assist with transporting the blocks up the ramps to the working area, where skilled masons would put them in place and build the corridors and chambers. Evidenced by a 5th dynasty relief in the Sun Temple of Niuserre and some inscriptions, Khufu, accompanied by the high priest and others, symbolically marked the 4 corners of the site in a ritual known as the stretching of the cord. The celebration was at the beginning of the construction, and it provided much inspiration for the workforce and administration to begin the construction in full. Near the site itself was the workers' dwelling, which houses overseers as well as workers, with around 3,500 dwelling units in an area of 150,000 square meters. Recent excavation have found more complex structures near the Wall of Crow that, based on archaeological evidence, were likely breweries, bakeries, and even a fish processing facility, copper tool shop, storerooms, amongst others. Green copper rust indicate that there was manufacturing of copper tools there. As for the work conditions and expectations of the workers, inscriptions reveal that the workers were artisans, craftsmen, supervisors, foremen, and all took great pride in their work. They were willing, they were not slaves, and apparently they were highly motivated by what they perceived as a project of great importance for the kingdom. As for pay, the workers were paid by their services by receiving the necessities for life, such as food, grain, beer, bread, housing, and even medical treatment. Some were paid more according to rank. However, all workers were compensated fairly as they were willing to engage in the hard labor. Mummies show evidence of medical treatment for much of the laborers, such as surgery, bones being set, and even skull trepanning. The men worked extremely hard and they usually died young. Just as the evidence is overwhelming that the workers at Giza were not slaves, I hypothesized that the motivated workers were the main reason why the project was able to be completed. The sheer amount of planning, oversight, materials, and expense would have been so massive even for a wealthy kingdom like Egypt. So it makes sense that the workforce, who have such pride in their work as well as a belief that they are working for a greater purpose, is the true reason why the Egyptians were able to build the Great Pyramid of Giza. My second question, how did the Egyptians afford to feed such a large workforce over a long period of time? The Egyptians were able to feed their workforce because of their massive wealth, a consequence of being located on the fertile, seasonally flooded plain lands beside the Nile River. All the way back to 4 to 5,000 BC, the Egyptians were already engaged in agriculture. The fact that Egypt was isolated in fertile land and bordered by a large desert and a massive sea to the north made it so they had few enemies and were able to peacefully develop into a strong, wealthy nation. We can say that there was a variety of agro-pastoral activities at Giza that intensified following the onset of the Old Kingdom, which plateaued during the construction of Giza. The agriculture was mainly dominated by emmer, wheat, barley, legumes, poles, and fodder, which is evidenced by mud bricks from Khufu's tomb. The workforce itself was large and diverse, said to exceed 25,000 workers. The workforce was broken up into smaller gangs called files, which meant tribes in Greek. Each file consisted of 200 workmen and also had overseers. Feeding such a large population would take efficient and organized agricultural production and logistics. As noted by Shisha, the notable and reoccurring influxes of workers to Giza undoubtedly created a substantial demand for food resources, which necessitated the development of a robust logistics system. The system relied on either local growing or regional supply, allowing societies to meet the food requirements of the growing population. This suggests that the Egyptians relied on many food sources within their own locality as well as from other crop-producing regions. As the Nile Valley was a source of agricultural wealth and hosted the hosted the cultivations of a wide variety of cereals, including wheat, barley, beans, lentils, fruits, date, palm, sorghum, grapes, and fibrous plants such as flax and papyrus. The workers were able to access a wide variety of nutritious options, both agricultural and animal. Archaeological evidence suggests that there were nearby settlements designed to feed and even house the pyramid workers in organized living spaces. Shisha wrote, associated with Menkaur's pyramid, a workman town, the city of the lost pyramids, has also been unearthed, attesting to the extensive occupation of the area. During the Old Kingdom, the Giza Plateau was primarily a pastoral landscape. Sheep, goats, and cattle were kept near the pyramid construction sites. They provided meat, wool, leather, and protein for the workers. Recent discoveries show that 11 cattle, 33 sheep, and 33 goats were slaughtered every day. Keeping the animals nearby was essential to maintaining a reliable source of protein for the workers. Agriculture did exist in the Old Kingdom, but it was mostly concentrated in the land that was seasonally flooded, allowing growing throughout the year. Although it is believed that the seasonal flooding was the main source of Egyptian wealth, livestock and pastoralism was the main source of food for the pyramid builders, especially due to the fact of needing a lot of protein. With that being said, the role of irrigation was crucial to both pastoral and agricultural development in the Old Kingdom. Regional food came into play mostly in the form of grains that were used to supplement carbohydrates when local farming was limited. Grain was able to last for a long time without spoiling. Finally, my third question, why were there so many seemingly unexplainable aspects to the way Pyramid of Giza was constructed, and what do those odd constructions have to say about Khufu? I decided to change up my historical question to make it more specific about the Pyramid of Giza, as well as Khufu, the pharaoh for whom the pyramid was built to entomb in the first place. There are many odd, seemingly unexplainable aspects to how Giza was built that have mystified scientists for ages, although Anthony Sakovich has strong arguments and explanations. The first phenomenon to explain is why there were multiple chambers that seemed to be unfinished or useless. Giza was made up with 3 burial chambers, including a subterranean chamber, queen's chamber, and king's chamber. Sakovich argues that each chamber represents a contingency plan in case Khufu died before the completion of Giza. Some chambers were never meant to be a permanent burial site. The shafts and waterways have perhaps been the most baffling wonders of the pyramid. Sakovich explains that the shafts were never meant for ventilation or star shafts, but instead as symbolic channels for cosmic waters of the abyss. The waters mirrored the flow of the Nile River and were necessary for Khufu's spiritual resurrection. The shafts were carefully constructed so that water could flow in and create an island for Khufu's sarcophagus. This suggests that the Egyptians were extremely religious and cosmological, to value the afterlife so high as to put in such effort for precise engineering. The Egyptians aligned the chambers, passages, and shafts to mirror celestial features. Most importantly, the Great Waterway, which was their celestial equivalent of the Nile River. The orientation of the shafts are aligned with the cosmic's water flow to revive Khufu in the afterlife. The Egyptians' choice of Aswan granite for the sarcophagus and burial chamber also links Khufu to the primeval mound and the Egyptian god Khnum. As for Khufu, the deliberate engineering and cosmological alignment of the construction of Giza suggests that both religion and cosmology were extremely important to him, so much that he engineered the construction of the shafts and waterways perfectly. It was clearly very important to Khufu to be resurrected in the afterlife to join the gods. And finally, as I wrap up this project, if I were to relate the construction of the Pyramid of Giza to a theme, I would say that a combination of inclusion and power is relevant. In a way, Pharaoh Khufu's power was used in a good way. By constructing the Pyramid of Giza and using motivated citizens as workers rather than slaves, whom he provided well for, he gave thousands of people a purpose. Only through the feeling of true inclusion in working towards a greater purpose could such a massive project be completed in a timely manner as it was. And that concludes my project. Thank you.